I think I have a type. The campaigns in Europa Universalis 5 that I've enjoyed the most so far have been quite similar to one another in one very specific way. I like to start small, have a struggle bus experience for a while, and then get rewarded for my perseverance with a sexy new flag. In this video, which has been sponsored by Paradox, so big thanks to them for that, is going to be another one of those times. The plan will be to take Navarre, which is surrounded on all sides by bigger, meaner, and more powerful kingdoms, drag myself into relevance, and be rewarded with one of my favourite flags that I have yet seen in this game. Colonial Empire Navarre. So, Navarre isn't completely useless. We start as a kingdom, which will come in handy when it comes to acquiring alliances, and it has a very delightful set of cultural advances that are unique to them. Memories of the Reconquista for 15% army morale will be essential to fight the Castilians and Aragonese, who have a similar advance themselves. Chartered councils to give proximity cost will also come in incredibly handy, as the north of Iberia is full of hilly terrain that will make it harder to propagate my control. If we survive long enough, we can acquire fearless seamen for 20% navy morale, and people of the sea, so our heavy ships get a 15% boost to their combat power. When we finally acquire a coastline, we will be a force to be reckoned with. But we have to get there first, and with a tax base of just 28 and 10 locations, one of the smallest cultures in Europe to boot, we definitely have an uphill climb ahead of us. A couple more of Navarre's unique content were two really quite decent government reforms. The first, Pyrenean Fueros, was just a free reform for a small amount of estate satisfaction and legitimacy. And the second, Sons of the Oak, made my heir slightly better, as well as giving me pop assimilation and hostile attrition. This one was fantastic, and it's something that I will never drop. Essentially, armies in Europa Universalis 5 don't really suffer from attrition as long as they can trace a line back to their unoccupied locations, as they can just supply their forces from there. But this reform, giving hostile attrition, does not care about that. It means that when inside my land, every month my enemy will be losing 1% of their army, and this is far more impactful than what you have in EU4. As when you're in hostile territory, you will not reinforce your professional armies at all. And levies just don't reinforce, period. If I could increase my defensiveness high enough, then a strategy for success could be literally allowing my enemies to attrit upon my fortresses. Early game, as a small nation, you don't really have many options but to sit tight and try to develop. So because of the wood and wool RGOs in my capital province, I focus on spinners' guilds to make cloth from wool, tailors' guilds to use that cloth and wool to make fine cloth, and also make a tiny bit of profit from it too. I also went for some papermakers' guilds, as they're always a moneymaker, as books are heavily in demand throughout the entire game. I also saved enough to get ourselves a hospital right before the Black Death hit us, to shield us from the worst of the apocalypse. The best method I have found for dealing with the Black Death is to segregate the infected for a cost of 10 stability, which gives you 15% disease resistance across your entire country, and then for 40 stability, isolating your cities is another good option. Though now you need to be at 75 satisfaction on your burghers to be allowed to do this. Using this method, we lost just 74,000 pops from our starting 247k. Though we also suffered from measles and smallpox, so overall we'd lost 98,000 pops to disease. Now sitting at 160,000 pop, with my smallest neighbour being the 1 million pop of Aragon, I pursued alliances with Portugal, the Papal States, and Castile. The Papal Alliance is very simple. The Pope gets an extortionate, literally, amount of money from the tithe, where all of Catholic Europe pays money straight into the papal coffers, so the Pope puts in a good word for them with the man upstairs. Becoming an ally of the Pope would eventually allow us to tap into this wealth and request money from them for favors. As for the Iberians, they were only ever going to be a temporary alliance, as the plan was betrayal, conquest, and assimilation. But I would need their help to get there. Because we were so much weaker than Castile, it required me to be in a defensive league with them and profess my trust before they would ally me. My first parliament after we signed the papers, we got ourselves a claim on Aragon, so I called them in. Now, at this time, we were only capable of raising around 3,200 men, and Aragon had far more than that. And they had more allies, with Provence, Genoa, Savoy, and Dauphiné all willing to aid them. But we stuck to our guns, and stuck around in only winning battles, retreating as soon as we could from anything that looked a little hairy. Castile was mostly busy sieging the south, but they did send a small 7,000 detachment north to aid us. And not without need either, as our enemies had invaded Navarre and begun to siege our capital of Iruna with nearly 11,000 men. Forgetting about my tag's greatest strength, the hostile attrition from Sons of the Oak, I launched into an attack, but quickly retreated as the battle was not going as well as I'd hoped. Changing tack, Castile and I left them to retreat on the walls while we went to siege some undefended provincial capitals. When we returned, they'd moved to siege another of my forts in the north, and were down to just 9.8k, while a small provincial army tried to siege the capital with 2.2k. We hit Provence first, and Castile mopped up the remnants while I recovered. Unfortunately, Aragon ended up with even more reinforcements coming in from their allies. So with 9,000 still stuck sieging, and a 28% chance of my fort falling, I decided to call it quits, and I pieced out for the provinces of Huesca and Zaragoza, as well as 139 ducats. Castile, of course, took over 100 of those ducats due to war participation, but we gained 85,000 pops to bring us almost back to where we started before the Black Death, at 244,000. Our new lands were full of Aragonese culture, so we decided for now to tolerate and accept them, while we made efforts to integrate our new lands. The RGOs we gained were also very nice indeed, with saffron, marble, and silk in Zaragoza ready to make us a heavy profit once we could increase the control in that land. This was aided by our next Parliament session, where we chose to promote integration in Zaragoza. While Parliament was debating, we'd increase the speed in which we integrated Huesca and Zaragoza by 20%, and we'd get a flat 20% jump to integration on Zaragoza if we passed. We also got one of our dynamic historical events, which allowed us to start building the Cámara de Comptos in our capital. This building would lower inflation by 0.05%, which doesn't sound like much, but what it means is that we can mint just that little bit more gold without taking on inflation. Our cavorting with the Pope also paid off, as we were able to ask them for some money. Spending 25 favours, we got 251 ducats from them, though we wouldn't be able to do this again for another 10 years. With the money, I started building up Zaragoza town, and because of the silk in the province, Tailors Guild would get a big boost to production efficiency if built there. When the Cámara de Comptos building completed, I integrated my minting income from 4.42 to 6.36 ducats. In 1374, with my parliament once again come around, I asked for a claim on Aragon. By this point, they had lost most of their allies, but they had allied with the Pope. So I used 20 favours to get them to break that alliance, and I declared with Castile in tow once again. Our first battle, though, did not go very well. Castile attempted to siege the hill fort of Catalao, and Aragon attacked. Though we reinforced in time, we couldn't swing the battle back in our favour, so we retreated. Aragon then marched to my capital to attempt to siege it, and I was content to let them. But Castile had other ideas, marching north with 17,000 to relieve the siege, smashing into the Aragonese and putting them to rout. At the end of it, Aragon's army had been cut fully in half. We had a few more battles going back and forth, but in the end I decided to abandon the idea of sieging any forts, as the north of Aragon seemed incredibly open. And with Castile's army attaching to mine, we took a fight just outside of Barcelona that put the final nail in the coffin. I took nearly 200,000 pops in the peace deal, stretching my borders all the way to the Mediterranean coast and splitting Aragon in half. Though I did release the fiefdom of Catalonia with 94,000 pops, who had cores on Tarragona and all of the remaining Aragonese land north of it. I would feed my new vassal in our next war. In one of my previous parliaments, I'd taken the chance to switch my aristocratic court to itinerant court. The reason for doing this is the minus 10% proximity cost through land modifier, but it came with another interesting side effect. Anytime my ruler died, it allowed me, for free, to move my capital to one of 3 options, with the ability to keep it in place also permissible. Thing is, though, that as Navarre had cores in Castile, Bilbao, a Castilian location, was on this list. This, of course, was reported to the developers immediately, but I couldn't help to try it out. Unfortunately, it didn't see the location to us, and it instead moved my capital to Tutera, which honestly wasn't a bad spot. It was closer to our Aragonese conquests, more central in my country overall, and located on flat farmland rather than hilly woods. The climate was worse though, being cold arid rather than oceanic, but overall it was a better capital location, so I kept it. It did mean I had to rebuild my capital-specific buildings like the Camara de Comptos and the Chancery, but this was better in the long run. My ruler dying also had another effect. My flag changed. Unfortunately, this time it was a downgrade. When Navarre is ruled by the Capetian dynasty, which for some reason my previous queen didn't count as even though she was a Capet, must be sexism, I don't know. Then Navarre will share flag space with the French Fleurs. Speaking of France, they saw the weakness of Aragon and declared war upon them. I don't know what gods are looking down on me though, because despite occupying all of the northern Aragonese lands, they didn't take a single location that I coveted, instead piecing out for land from Aragon's allies in Savoy and Dauphiné. The next time we warred with Aragon, we would be taking the full Pyrenees borders. It was mandatory. We could not allow France another opportunity to enter Iberia. Thankfully, we did not have to use our parliament for it, as Catalonia had a CB called Following Through on Threat, which gave a minus 25% conquer cost. France, the chill dude that he was, had broken all of Aragon's alliances, and the only one they'd picked up since was Brabant. So we once again called Castile to war and invaded. There was a little bit of back and forth, and again I wouldn't have won without the aid of Castile. But in the end, with 60 war score to our name, we decided to do something truly repulsive. I snaked. Had I taken what I wanted from Aragon, then France would have been mega pissy at me, and that's something I couldn't really gamble with. So instead of taking all of the north, I instead snaked up the coastline and then back across the mountains, making a large Aragonese enclave. I also took Majorca for myself, which was released to a new vassal, and the province of Teruel. All in all, we gained 243,000 pops for myself and vassals, and Aragon was down to just 459,000. The snaking, unfortunately, has another effect, and I do fear that this may become the meta way to play. Because Aragon could no longer trace a line from his capital to his land, the proximity dropped to 0%, which then lowered the control across the board. In future wars, because control was so low, it would be far cheaper to take. I do worry that the way to play optimally in the future would be to encircle an enemy capital to bring their control down to 0 for a future conflict. Because of my woeful amount of trade capacity and awkward trade location, it had taken a very long time for any institution to reach me, and the first ended up being professional armies. I waited as long as I could to embrace it, but I ended up spending over 40 stability, as I'd run out of useful techs that I wanted in the generic Renaissance tree. I rushed down to armories and gun workshops, as while armories were a huge money sink, and professional troops were heavily nerfed from previous patches we played on, they were still essential in progressing to the next phase of the game. Gunsmiths, on the other hand, were often very profitable, and we had some pretty good RGOs with which to make them too. I also built a cathedral in Sitges, the location where Paradox Tinto is located and where EU5 was born. And I got to see the unique model they have for the cathedral, based on the Church of St. Bartholomew and Santa Tecla. As far as I'm aware, there are only 2 unique models in the version that we have, this cathedral and the castle in Stockholm, so I went to have a look at Tre Kronoborg as well. I can't wait till this map is filled up with all these unique models as the game expands and deepens over time. My truce ran out with Aragon, and we crushed him. Because in the last war I did the dismantlement of forts, it was a simple case of walking in and crushing whatever remained. Aragon was turned into an island kingdom in Sardinia, and I released Valencia from what I had conquered. Soon I would begin the annexations of these tags, but first I wanted to try become the ally of France. They had a negative 40 modifier for wanting to be allies due to me maybe being the target of a coalition, though that coalition consisted only of the defeated Aragon and the French vassal states. Regardless, I began to use my diplomats to improve relations with each in turn. In 1403, I did the same trick as I did with Castile, professing my trust for a hit of diplomatic reputation, and then allying the next month. When checking the war deck screen for Castile, though, I was dismayed to be reminded that they were a part of the Defensive League, which meant that even though I had remained allied with the Pope and Portugal, both would aid Castile when I inevitably attacked him. Isolate allies this time would not cut it. I would have to bring back an old faithful from EU4. The plan would be to attack someone like Morocco or Tunis, call in the Pope and Portugal into that war. While they were off doing that, I would attack Castile with French help and make sure to win that war before peacing out with the Berbers. All I needed was to wait out the 5-year truce with Castile, and we were in business. In the meantime, I asked Portugal for some money, and with my own economy now beginning to really boom, I upgraded my capital, Teruel, into a city. I had something like 15 buildings queued up in the location, so turning it into a city would allow them to be built 2 at a time, which really helped speed along the process. France, being my new ally and all, called me into the next phase of the 100 Years' War, and I sieged the 2 locations bordering me, hoping that maybe France would be kind and grant the land to me in a peace deal. My participation wasn't exactly super high, but my vassal did manage to land in England and do a little sieging. Unfortunately, this war took forever to peace out of, taking over 5 years before they finally agreed to peace. The first thing I saw, though, was Mole to Navarre. We had gotten a single location. It could be worse. With this, the 100 Years' War was over. Checking again whether France would aid me in my war versus Castile, I was a little dismayed again to see that France now seemingly loved them and wouldn't join me in a war. But I had a trick up my sleeve, and that was the tiny mountain nation of Andorra. See, I'd also invited them to the Defensive League way back when, and now that brilliant foresight was going to pay off. My next parliament to come up, I grabbed myself a claim, also some larger levies, and I put Operation Distraction into action, decking on Morocco with Portugal and the Pope in tow, and then a month later, decking my true war against Andorra. I sat my army in the mountains on the border with France, and Castile took the bait, marching in to attack my 13,000 with 23,000 of his own. It seemed he was probably right to do so, though, as he more than matched casualties despite suffering a -3 to the dice roll. We retreated and allowed him to start sieging Iruna. I had intended for him to suffer the attrition, but instead France decided to attack him there with their own 23,000 army, so we moved in order to reinforce, though France retreated before we could arrive. We also retreated, suffering around about 1,000 casualties each. I thought it wouldn't be easy, but then France really pulled out all the stops and came barreling into Iberia like it was 1808. We, of course, aided, but mainly focused on sieging the unprotected provincial capitals in the center of Castile. With much of Castile occupied, and checking the war screen, we could peace out Andorra for 100%. So we did. Soria was a big grab for us, as it was the province that directly bordered our capital. Alava was taken too, as we already had a location in that province, and it'd be rude to leave it. And finally, the province of Gipuzkoa. Not only was this land full of Basque pops, not only was it our cores already, but it was coastal. We finally had a port on the Atlantic Ocean. We could begin to explore the world. But not before we dealt with Morocco. They had separate peace with Portugal and forced them to surrender 3 locations in the south. They also started sending me demands from my vassals' lands. That was, of course, unacceptable. So I marched my army back to besiege Valencia and put an end to the threat. Their armies were wiped, but that wasn't enough. We couldn't get more war score unless they came to us, and why would they? They'd just be murdered again. In the end, to get out of the war, if for nothing else, I paid off the Berbers for 560 gold. A small price to pay, considering the benefit we'd just gotten from Castile. We were now up to 790,000 pops, with nearly half of that being Basque. Our vassals contributed another 650,000. Castile, though, of course still vastly outnumbered us with their 4 million, but we had France on our side. Our big blue sledgehammer ready to ask how high when I tell them to jump. Funnily enough, even though we had just been at war and their opinion of me was at -42, I still had a bunch of favors with Castile, and I could ask them for money. I could have gotten slightly more had I asked the French, but I thought taking coin from the coffers of my enemy was probably worth more than the 200 extra the French were offering. With the money, I started building counting houses, a building whose only function was to increase my crown power. Still definitely worth it despite the high price of them. In 1437, the Age of Discovery rolled around, and for something maybe a little different, I decided to follow the military focus. I do think this one will be essential in multiplayer, but in single player it seems a little surplus to requirements compared to the buffs one can get from especially the administrative focus. Mostly, I took it because the 20% buff to my heavy ship combat power from oak forests for ships would pair nicely with the 15% heavy ship combat power from my unique Navarre's People of the Sea advance. We also picked up the Iberian Caravel, an Iberian culture unique light ship that would go in place of the standard bark. They had the same maritime presence boost, but the Caravel had slightly higher movement speed, cannons, and hull strength. The first of the institutions to arrive was the printing press, spawning in the south of France while France and I were off fighting England. Clearly, the press was used for some anti-Anglo propaganda. As we were allied, we'd be sharing embraced institutions with one another, and some of my locations were in the Bordeaux market, so it could spread that way as well. Hopefully, we'd be embracing this one far earlier than we did the previous Aegis institutions. Pike and Shot and New World came soon after, with the former spawning in Saint-Étienne and the latter in Rome. We got very lucky. All three institutions spawning within allies is a great win for us. With the war against England ending and England itself being absolutely rinsed by France, we again got ourselves a claim on Andorra. Once again, France had too high an opinion of Castile to do the right thing and help us directly against them, and still the Pope and Portuguese wanted to defend the Castilians thanks to this damned defensive pact, so we decided to just go for it. The first battle went swimmingly, as I brought my full force to bear against the Castilian professional army as it tried to siege Guardia, and feeling confident, I marched my army to the fort of Burgos, though I then began to retreat as I saw a 20k stack marching my way. Castile followed, and we took battle in Velarcayo, where they crossed a river into a hilly wood, suffering a -3 to their dice rolls. We killed 3 times the number that we suffered, and the Castilians retreated. It was a fantastic victory, but not one that I could sustain, obviously. We would need the French to finish with the Pope soon and get down to me. After a few more battles, I was down to below 10,000 troops, but the Pope would accept peace for max money and war reps. War reps from the Pope is a hell of a win, as it amounted to like 30 ducats a month because of the tithe. As soon as the peace was signed, the Pope even asked to re-ally me, which, considering we were still at war, was a bit of a shock. Naturally, we accepted. The Pope was a good friend, and this was clearly all a misunderstanding that would never happen again. Never. Portugal was also set for peace sometime later, and then we pieced out the main event with Andorra. Taking nothing from him, of course, but taking Burgos, La Montana, and Biscay from Castile. After disbanding my levy, I saw that my professional troops were down to just 400 men. The 3,000 men I needed to reinforce would take 3 years to replenish. In 1460, I snagged 1,500 ducats from a French vassal and spent it all on building trade offices in Bordeaux, hoping to boost my trade income. I'm still not entirely comfortable with the trading system, so generally I leave it all on automated. But I still have my small presence in the Bordeaux market already, and this would be a way of boosting my presence without conquering my good friend and ally. 38 of them were queued up all along the western coast of France, and when they were done, they brought my trade income from under a ducat to between 20 and 30 in Bordeaux alone. Considering they cost around 37 ducats a pop, this would eventually lead to a pretty tidy profit. In 1464, I once again used my parliament to go to war with Andorra. Europe must really have been wondering what the hell all of this was going on at this point. The third Navarre's conquest of a tiny 5,000 pop bishopric in the mountains? Crazy stuff. My army still hadn't reinforced, so I let France do all of the heavy lifting. Again. I mean, I always let them do the heavy lifting, but this time I wasn't going to look to help out at all. The peace deal was simple. We took land along the north coast of Castile, enough to release the nation of Leon, and also the Azores Islands. Ideally, I would have released Azores as the historical colonial nation, but for whatever reason it wouldn't let me. Instead, I released it as a custom-subject colonial nation, which named it as the Viceroyalty of Angra, led by Ignacio Eugenio. Very snazzy. I once again allied the Pope so that I could get the New World, as it had only spread to 10% of my country so far, and I needed it to be at 20% before I could embrace and begin exploring across the waves. It was only 1468, to be fair, so we were still a touch early for sailing the ocean blue anyway. Looking at my integration map mode, it was clear that I wasn't getting full cores on any of the Catalan culture provinces, and with Catalonia being close to integrated, it was time to accept their culture. I was well within my capacity, and I decided that long-term Aragonese and Catalan would be accepted, but Castilian was a bit too large for that, so we would instead try to assimilate them. They integrated in 1477, and instantly my economy went into a little bit of shit. We lost the income from them being my vassal, and my tax base spiked to around 470, meaning that my cultural investment spiked alongside it. I lowered the slider to around 50%, but was still spending way over 30 ducats a month. Thankfully, the control in the region didn't actually seem too bad, so it was probably still worth integrating it, and I also began the integration of Valencia as well. In 1484, I upgraded the halberdiers, crossbowmen, and handgunners to early arquebusiers, which, along with increasing their damage output, increased the size of the regiments from 200 to 400. This nearly doubled the size of my army, and with it I was ready for another war against Castile. According to the Great Power Rankings, I had the third largest standing army in the world, after Bohemia, France, and maybe whatever other non-GP had a larger army than I did. I decided on 3 more early arquebusiers, bringing my total forces up to 7,450, larger even than France was bringing to bear, and with it I declared on Andorra. For the most part, this war showed me that the balance between levies and professional soldiers isn't quite there yet. The issue is that with a levy, each regiment has 1,000 men, whereas these professional soldiers had just gotten upgraded to have 400. As long as levies were over a certain size, and whatever that certain size, Castile was certainly over it, then professional troops would be at a huge disadvantage that their increased combat damage wouldn't come close to overcoming. It even felt at times that with an even number of professionals versus levies, the levies would probably still come out on top. Either way, this war went roughly as expected, though we did encounter some trouble while trying to siege Porto, as we were trapped within its fort's gravity well, and couldn't get out at all. When the Castilian levy rocked up to fight us, we lost battle after battle, only retreating 1 tile away. If it weren't for a French intervention, we'd have lost the entire army. In the end, they'd been reduced to about 800 men before we managed to escape, replenishing in Leon before coming back to finish the job on Porto. In the peace deal, we ended the threat of a Castilian northern coast by taking and releasing Galicia, as well as a province from Portugal too. The coastal snake had truly begun. At the end of the war, the New World Institution finally unlocked for me in October 1490, and I queued up every bit of exploration tech I could find. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that I needed to rush specifically for overseas exploration, so I ended up with it being 13th in the queue. This would slow me down from exploring the oceans for several years until I realized and corrected my mistake. In 1499, we dispatched explorers along 3 main sea lanes. One group headed south towards Africa, while the other 2 took westward paths. By 1500, the 3rd expedition had set off, charting a course along the Atlantic North Equatorial Current. Then, in September 1501, we got our first glimpse of the Caribbean islands. 4 explorers were immediately dispatched to map the entirety of this newly uncovered sea. We had to be the first to claim these islands. Simultaneously, we increased our efforts along the African coast, sending explorers both along the shoreline and further inland to discover what treasures might be found there. And then, on the 1st of April 1505, we discovered the New World. We were clearly the first to arrive here too, as we got an event telling us of this momentous occasion. Our explorer had set foot on a small island and encountered folk from across the sea. This event also gave us a ton of money, so we absolutely made use of it, sending off more explorations to map the islands properly. Something else we spent the money on was upgrading our marketplaces to the new merchants' quarters. Upgrading buildings has been a bit of a pain point in EU5 for a while, and there are a few ways to go about it, both from the location screen, from the macro builder pressing the merchants' quarter building itself, but the best way I've found, which is still a bit of a pain, is by clicking on the marketplaces in your macro builder, which are no longer constructible, and upgrading via there. It's still a bit of a faff, but it has gotten better with successive patches. In 1510, we finished the discovery of the islands of Cape Verde, and surprisingly, Castile and Portugal had yet to set up a charter there, so we did it. 44 pops a month would migrate to the islands, which were right now unpopulated. It wouldn't be difficult to secure full control over them, then build a bunch of ports, marketplaces, and other such buildings to pull valuable trade from the Ivory Coast. Also in 1510, some fella in Germany called Martin or something nailed a list of demands to the door of a church, and so began the Reformation situation. The first 20 countries that choose to swap to Lutheranism can do so for free. And as I hadn't actually tried out the religion yet, I thought maybe I could give it a shot this time. I did have to wait for Lutheran preachers to reach me, however, and that seemed to be taking a while. In 1512, despite only 750 of my 2.3 million pups being Lutheran, one of them had clearly gotten a message to the ear of our queen, and she embraced the Reformation. The first thing I did was dissolve the few monasteries that we had in our country, and gained a pretty penny for it too. We would need to grow out our fervor to take any more actions, or get ourselves any religious aspects. I set my 100 martial skill cabinet member to begin converting our population, as we're in a little bit of a religious troubling period right now. Despite sending off expeditions to check out the islands to the east of the Caribbean first, our first detailed maps of the region came back from Cuba. So again, colonial charters were set up, and pops from several different regions of my country started making their way to the New World. In October 1513, we spotted it. The first bit of colour in the New World. The first planting of the flag. The first territory on a fresh new continent that we could call our own. Laura, on the island of Cuba. It was beautiful. What was not quite so beautiful, though, was that this caused the Great Pestilence situation to arise in January 1514. And while we moved to segregate the infected, as we were 100% benevolent colonizers, the apocalypse still began to ravage through this new land, with 1 million or more dying every single month. 1 year later, 12.8 million had died. In April 1518, we'd finally settled enough land for a colony to be set up. I could of course choose to either set up a new subject, keep the land for myself, or even choose to tag switch to the colony. I do think a very fun campaign idea could be one as England, where you begin a colony in the Americas and become the USA from that. Maybe that's something I can do after release. I of course chose to form a new colonial subject, and thus the Viceroyalty of Camagüey was born. A few months later, the Great Pestilence ended, though rather disappointingly, the game actually wouldn't let me see the total dead, only how many we had lost. I reloaded the autosave just to check, even though it brought me back to before my colony had finished. The death toll we saw, though, 14.4 million pops. I set up a new market in my colony's capital so that it can import the goods needed for me to do some more explorations. And I sent some out to the Gulf of Mexico, the Southern Caribbean Sea, and also into Mexico itself. I wanted to try out the conquistador style of colonization, and I thought this might be a good way of going about it. We also started building a spy network on the only native we could see, Maya, but they caught me in the act. Mali, though, did not find my spy, and we used 4D spy network to steal maps of Benin. In 1525, my queen died, and I had expected for her daughter, the talented Amata, queen of my vassals Leon, Majorca, and Galicia, to take the throne. Instead, we ended up in a permanent regency. This had happened because she was a Catholic, whereas my nation was Lutheran. To be honest, it's a little bit silly because my late queen was a Hussite. I reloaded the game just before Parliament was called and used it to change my laws to allow for religious group succession. Unfortunately, this made her brother, the Serbian Charles, to be the next king instead. How disappointing. It did mean, though, as his surname was Stachitizes, that our flag returned to the gorgeous Navarre's chains flag. Swings and roundabouts, I guess. Another issue of my becoming Lutheran was that the Conquistador's advance, which I was eligible for via being Iberian, was suddenly no longer something I could utilize, as the mechanic was locked behind being a Catholic, for whatever reason. And it's a shame, too, because despite other creators telling me that the mechanic was kinda ass, I kinda wanted to give it a try. In 1536, I got my very first religious aspect. This cost 50 religious influence, and I'd been saving up for this for a very long time, so I was only growing by 0.1 a month. I decided to go with parish registers, as along with the 5% tax efficiency, it also gave me another 0.1 influence per month, quite literally doubling my gains. We were now up to 63% Lutheran, as I had 3 cabinet members working on conversion ever since we converted, with places like Zaragoza and Huesca being over 90% Lutheran. Navarre itself had some catching up to do, as it was only at 64%, though it also had the largest population to convert. In 1537, the Age of Reformation began, and again I took some time looking at the technologies before settling on diplomatic, mostly for the 10% tax efficiency and 20% efficiency of cabinet. Confessionalism spawned in the center of Bohemia, global trade in Tunis, and artillery in Cordoba, which looked like it would soon be Moroccan. Also in 1537, I finally finished the final colony in the Caribbean islands, and set up multiple colonial subjects over there. Cuba, which is what I renamed Camagüey to, was the largest, consisting of, obviously, Cuba, but also the Wacas Islands to the north of it. It had 104,000 population, of which 93,000 were Basque. Jamaica was limited to just the island of Jamaica, and they had a further 30,000 pops, almost all Basques again. Marion was on the Hispaniola island, though I also gave them the island of Borican. They had 124,000 pops, of which 100,000 were Basque. And finally, the Windward and Leeward Islands were set up with 41,000 pops, again almost all Basque. None of the colonies were yet very built up, but I had started to do some manual trading, building slave centers and overseas trading posts in Africa, and transporting the goods over to the Caribbean. The population of slaves was small right now, but it would grow as I built more plantations in the New Worlds and marketplaces in Africa. I kept looking at whether I could attack Portugal or Castile, but France really wasn't interested in getting involved. Unfortunately, I could also no longer use the Andorra trick, as they were seemingly no longer part of the defensive league. To that end, I used my parliament to get a claim on Aragon, as I noticed that they were a rival of France. If I could full annex Aragon and force France to choose a new rival, then there was a chance that that would end up being Castile. They chose Mali. Fuck. Well, now that I boarded them, both Genoa and Tunis both declared me to be their rivals too. That wasn't so bad. I wanted to go to war with both of them and take the rest of Corsica and Sardinia, and now that I was here, after all. I built up a spy network on Tunis and started to fabricate a claim for religious war. I also turned on automatic exploration and colonization, as I was interested in seeing what regions the AI would prioritize. Also, the whole process is a bit of a faff, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was changed at some point. In 1546, I declared war on Tunis, landing my professional army in Tempio, my single location on the island, and assaulting the nearby fort. Things were going well for me until I got to Eles, in the center of the island. Tunis had brought a large force to bear, as well as a navy that could defeat mine, so I was forced to retreat. My professionals came close to being stack-wiped. I had 0 troops at one point, and they were only saved thanks to the timely arrival of my levies. I merged with them and retreated back to my own location to recover. From then, it was a case of pushing where possible and also bringing back troops to my own lands to defend against naval landings by Algiers. Barcelona was besieged, and many thousands of Navarrans were taken as slaves. They would be liberated in the final peace deal. The tide turned when I caught the enemy sieging one of the forts I'd occupied, and bouncing back and forth as the AI tried again and again to take the fort, we whittled down their numbers before once again advancing. Extra professional troops were recruited, and we pushed south with 19,000 men. Once the island had been captured, we attempted to land in Tunis itself, upon the small peninsula to the south. We were rebuffed, but managed to retreat to the navy. We tried again north of Tunis and managed to make a landing stick, and I recruited more regulars for the army. We couldn't make any progress than that, though, and after the war had been going on for 10 years, my people demanded peace. I took the entirety of Tunisian Sardinia, the return of my people from bondage, and a heavy sum of ducats. We had lost 22,000 men in this war, though, to be honest, it felt much higher, and the enemy had lost 51,000. It was one of the toughest wars I'd fought in EU5, and it really shows how naval logistics are super important, and without it, you will simply lose. From the conquest, Arborea was reborn with nearly 80,000 pops. The High Judicate would serve me well in the middle of the Med. Realizing that my trade in Africa was really stalling out, I started working on Cape Verde. First building some marketplaces, then creating a new market center in Santiago, then diverting trade from my colony to myself. I then set it up to take slaves from the Benin market. I think the Niani trade wasn't working because it didn't have vision from the coast to the market center, so I started getting spy network on Mali again to steal those maps. My colony of Cuba was suffering from a revolt, so I split up my army and brought 7,000 to the New World to deal with it, and surprisingly they even managed to reinforce while there. In 1559, I got what is probably the best parliament agenda in the game right now: balance the budget. This one lowered inflation by 0.4 while active, allowing you to crank up your minting to the absolute max and gain a ton of income from it. I also considered who to attack with the Parliament CB and settled on Portugal until I saw they were in a junior partnership union underneath Castile. so I wouldn't be able to attack them directly. And with Castile the ally of my ally and the two Sicilies, I held off on it. Instead, I got a claim on the Maya. It was time to enter the New World aggressively. First though, I had to take care of my rebels. When a rebellion is over 95% progress, you cannot declare war. I had one at 96 and another at 91. As soon as it was low enough, in May 1560, I attacked, or I would have if I had any diplomats. In January 1561, we attacked. We had our first battle against the natives in March, our 6800 charging into the capital of Maya and facing off against 4200 of theirs. It was not close. We lost 70 men, they lost 1700. But because the Maya venerated the god Huracan, they had the same bonus I did, attrition for enemies. For that reason, I didn't want to spend too much time sieging, so instead I assaulted the forts. This did cost the lives of hundreds at a time, but I thought it would be far more costly to sit and attrit for years on the dozens or so forts I saw just in this small piece of Mesoamerica. I did send my boats home though, as I thought bringing the other 7k might be worth it. In 1564, the war was finally over. Though the war screen only showed me having a few hundred losses, we had in fact lost many thousands to assault and attrition. It would be really nice if the game recognized attrition, assaults, and all of that rather than just battles. I released the land to a new colonial nation under Amata, the girl who would be queen, my 89 100-100 white whale. At least she would be doing some good in the colonies for a while. It had 592,000 pops, though only 4.46 tax base. This would require some investment. I also founded the first colony in Florida, and began to send charter companies all throughout the East Coast. With a base income of 400 ducats, my economy was booming with the new colonial wealth. To boost this further, I built a trade company headquarters on the westernmost tip of Cuba. This building couldn't be built anywhere that there were Basque burghers, and it gave me tax base, trade capacity, and maritime presence in the area. This was the first time I'm building it, so I'm still learning how it works. In the New World, our colonial efforts in the Americas was working out, with Roanoke being turned into the colony of Amerigo in 1571, based out of the port of Pamlico. By 1580, every coast from Massachusetts to Florida was owned by a colony of Navarre, a glorious red outline of the New World. Amerigo had 133,000 pops at this time, with Florida having a further 65,000. With that done, I started to work on Louisiana and Texas, sending out charters across the entire coastline towards Mexico. In 1583, the first of these completed in Chihuahua. We created a new colonial subject here and renamed it to New Huesca, queuing up a bunch of buildings for their new capital. In 1585, I went to war with the Mayans again, using an exploration CB. It did say conquests were going to be 50% more expensive, so I'm honestly not sure how you're supposed to conquer Mexico, as the land I took in my last war was really not that large and also cost 100 war score, and that was at a 25% discount. The attrition was still brutal, and the Mayans had decided to occupy my Texan and Central American lands, taking slaves with every siege. Fighting here is awful. I peaced out after 4 horrific years of fighting in the jungle for another chunk of Mayan territory, the return of my people, and some war reps. In 1592, the Wars of Religion situation started, and I was surprised to see France being a member of it, because usually it was just limited, at the very start at least, to being only members of the HRE. And then I noticed that France was not just a member, but the leader of the Catholic League and of the HRE itself. France had been elected. This was as powerful as the HRE had been since maybe Charlemagne. We would be staying out of this one. Having looked around the GP list and seeing that I once again was having a bit of a struggle getting onto it, I started building up. I had by far the largest fleet, with 10 more than what I was required to have to become the naval hegemon. Our army would also put us in second place. I needed to get my score up somehow, though. I started by upgrading a bunch of locations to towns and cities, and hoped to get a string of cities between the ports of San André and Tortosa, so that I could build pound-lock canals in a line through Iberia. I also used my cabinet to encourage migration, so these towns could reach the 30,000 pop needed to become cities. After upgrading my units to the next tier, the Tercio, it turns out that my infrastructure was not nearly enough for it yet, as even standing armies already in the field take up manpower. So I had to disband some troops. 13,000 men were disbanded, which put the manpower again back into the positive. I had to be careful when hiring troops, and remember about the manpower upkeep. It's something very different to EU4, and something you can't really afford to forget about. 2 Sicilies called me to arms, as they had been invaded by the Tunisians. and I wanted to test out my Tercio. I saw them sieging near Rome, so I transported half of my army across the Med in order to have battle. Unfortunately, EU5 seems to have a bit of an issue with ping-ponging defeated armies, as morale gains on the hour tick rather than the day or the month. There's very little ability to get a morale stack wipe on a decently sized foe. I ended up sending my armies to automatically seek battle, but this only worked for a short time before they retreated past a larger 20k stack of levies, so I brought the rest of the troops ready to battle again. We brought our army to Greece next, fighting Ottoman troops in Epirus and sending them to rout. There's something to be said too about using fleets that aren't going over their frontage, as the movement penalty is really impactful. And chasing around smaller fleets really isn't fun when your armada is so bulky and sluggish. Bohemia became the economic and military hegemon on the same day, which meant they had just become a GP. Checking their GP score, they sat in 8th place at 546 points. We weren't that far behind. While we were in 15th place, our score was just 491. We would catch these guys! While I liberated Greece, Two Sicilies just kinda sat in its arse doing nothing. Tunis had landed in Sicily, and they just didn't seem to care. Looks like I would be doing this one solo. We took our big first L fighting against armies that I thought I'd fought plenty before. Maybe the Ottomans had gotten a new technology or something, as where we were doing hellish casualties in every fight, trying to dislodge this levy from sieging Argos cost me 6,000 losses, which was around 20% of our total casualties in the war in general. Of course, their side had already taken 220k losses, so it's not like the war was even in any way. I waited to reinforce and tried again, and it went so much better. I've actually got no idea what happened. Maybe I forgot to rebalance my flanks or something. While we were sieging Achaia, Two Sicilies accepted peace, actually taking land in Africa itself, as well as the strange little enclave they took from the Pope in Sicily. In 1615, I noticed that the game now claimed I was stronger than Castile and her allies, but my manpower was depressingly low, so I started focusing on building barracks to replace the armories that had gone out of fashion. With 11k now in the bank, I declared war. Neither France nor Two Sicilies would aid me, so we'd be fighting this all on our own. This time, the levies were raised. 21k of them to go alongside my 23k professional army. Our first battle gave me the confidence I needed to know that we were going to win. Castile had not picked up the later levy techs, so it was rocking peasant levy and men-at-arms, whereas my levy was made up heavily of flintlocks, much more powerful. We killed 5,000, they killed 500. We marched to Castile to siege, and they tried a counter-siege. Unfortunately for them, I could trap them on the siege with my levy, and if they wanted to break free from it, they'd either have to attack my guys in the mountains or win the siege, which was causing them 1% attrition per month. I love this little tag. We took another fight in Leon, then stack-wiped the 11k remainder as it fled to the capital of Valladolid, which we began to siege. Noticing Porto nearing surrender, I used my levy to attack the army I trapped, then rushed it over to relieve the siege. Our levy crushed theirs, again proving just how good an upgraded levy is with the right tech. After a few more sieges, I checked as to whether I would be able to separate piece the Portuguese, and it turned out that I very much could. This would be a fantastic war. I immediately had my army start focusing on them, as I would separate piece for 100 before moving on to fully go after Castile. After fully occupying Portugal, I pieced them out, taking the majority of their coastline in Iberia. Soon they would be a landlocked power. And then, in June 1625, we pieced out with Castile, taking much of the borderland, over 1.8 million pops, and surprisingly, the coalition wasn't even that excessive. We were now up to 1.5 million Castilians, and I could technically accept them, as I had enough spare culture capacity slots available. I kept this idea in the back pocket for now, though. Portuguese, though, I decided to accept immediately, even though I'd already culture converted Porto. During the war, France had demanded I change my court language to French, due to their silly little cultural hegemony, so we were stuck with that for another 10 years. Looking at our cultural influence versus those on the Great Power list, I could see that I would be the cultural hegemon if I managed to make it up there. Such was the power of my culture that Lerma, a province I just conquered from Castile, was already majority Basque before I'd even managed to integrate it. I would still need to increase my points by around 200 to get on the list, and since GP's score from trade capacity was nerfed in the most recent build of the game, the best way to do it was still going to be population scaled by control. I just needed more pops, and Castile would have to supply. In 1633, some of the cores started coming our way, and then we declared war again. There's not much to say about this war except for one part. The Pope must really hate me. My levy's only task, it seemed, was rebuffing the constant suicidal sieges the Pope would do against my Pyrenees forts, though he was also the reason that I remembered to upgrade a bunch of them to bastions. The difference in defensiveness between castles and bastions, though, is rather insane, as the garrison will literally quadruple from 250 to 1,000 defenders. I ended up setting the levy to hunt army with only the mountain forts as targets for the AI to look at. This seemed to work pretty well. So far, after 3 years of fighting, we'd lost 16,000 men to their 117,000. It would be nice if this screen showed a breakdown of who had lost the men, but that isn't the case right now. It has been requested. I gave the Pope 5,000 ducats for them to peace out, and I used the free levies to turn back and start pushing hard on Castile. While the war was still raging, the age of absolutism began, and yet again I spent time looking at which of the focuses I wanted. I went with administrative for the proximity cost and army initiative, but honestly, I don't think there's a bad choice to be made here. The Colombian exchange also started, and I planned to move many goods as soon as I was out of this war. Portugal was pieced out in 1638, and I took the rest of the coastline in Iberia. They had colonies, sure, but they were now landlocked as a European power. I think because this war went into the age of absolutism, war score costs were super low, so I ended up taking far more than I ever expected to, with Leon getting the majority, but not all, as I wanted to use their CB again, cores back, and myself taking a huge chunk of land. After 18,000 dead on my side and 127,000 dead on theirs, we shot up to 7 million pops, a gain of 1.2 million. I embraced the scientific revolution really quickly in 1340, and I immediately cancelled all of my current researches to rush down Integrate Area. This would come in kinda handy after my recent conquests against Castile. With the Colombian exchange, I moved a little maize and tobacco over to Spain, with the tobacco really looking like it would make quite a lot of money. In cocoa, I spread a little bit more of in the Caribbean. I'm sure you can make so much more money than I am from this. I guess I just need to learn the trade system a bit more. With prestige actually being quite difficult to get in this game, I really think the 5 prestige cost per good movement should be changed to something else. The court and country disaster fired too, and I decided that I would go through the liberalist path. While absolutism did look tempting, I knew I had quite a large colonial empire, and absolutism probably wouldn't look too good to them. Speaking of the colonial empire, it seemed that every one of them broke out in rebellion over this decision, so I loaded up my army onto boats and shipped them over to the Americas to help out. To end the disaster, I would need to have my nobles at 60% satisfaction and have 50 liberalism societal value after 10 years. The requirements for absolutism were much more strict. I also decided to go back on my decision to just culture convert all of the Castilians. I would be so much more wealthy if they were happy, so 31% of my population rejoiced, as I first tolerated and then accepted them. This did put me just slightly over my accepted culture limit at 3.45 out of 3.23, but I wasn't overly worried. This instantly gave me cores over a lot of territory, which meant more control over so much more territory, which meant great power rank boosting. I was only around 100 score away. In November 1647, we were back at war with Castile, and in 1651, the only land Castile controlled in Iberia was, ironically, Gabal Tariq, Gibraltar, though it was only accessible by water. Again, ironically, because Morocco had the land around it. We brought our boats around to begin the final siege of Castile, but before I could start it, I got an event. A glorious event, a wonderful event that told me that I had become a cultural hegemon. I had become a great power. I had dragged myself into 8th place with 651 points, 90 behind rank 6 France. We had to capitalize. I immediately began assimilating the entire area of Toledo with a 99 skill cabinet member. Right now, it was only 1.03% Basque, but he was converting 49 pops a month per location. So in just 1 month's time, that 1.03% turned into 1.85%. Unfortunately, in July, I then lost GP status. But I knew I was on the cusp. We would get it back. While we waited, though, I checked on my court and country disaster and saw that I had all but one of the requirements met to end it. All I really needed was a bit of loyalty on my nobles, and so I just threw some money at the problem. We ended the disaster for 5,000 ducats. Honestly, the return on investment there is huge, as I now had 25% more estate satisfaction, which meant more taxes. We pieced out Portugal, taking all of their land in Iberia, and then pieced with Castile too, cutting them off from the coast. We're now up to 8.3 million pops, just 75 points away from France in GP rank 8. In 1657, it happened again. I once again joined the ranks of the great powers, even overtaking France. We were instantly proclaimed as both the cultural and diplomatic hegemons, and I got my own back on France by forcing them to start speaking Basque in their court. Checking on the other hegemons, I was in second place for Eco, around 600 ducats behind Suzhou, 5th place for Naval at 80 heavies behind, and 3rd place for military at around 9,000 men behind. Honestly, I probably could get them all, but being a GP increased my cost of court by 1.25%, and each hegemony thereafter was another 1%. Becoming a GP actually lowered my income quite significantly. We seemed to be just on the cusp of GP status, as between April and June of 1658, we dropped out back into regular status. The problem is, the GP list isn't just the top 8 or GPs, it's all about power, and your score versus that of the guy in first place, who I couldn't even see. If number 1 GP just ran away with it, then the amount of available GP slots would shrink. I think having a cooldown on the, oh, you dropped out, here's a year until you absolutely get kicked out to sort your shit out, would be pretty good. When the truce ran out with Castile in August 1660, we attacked again, aiming to drive him out of Iberia for good. Now at this point the game was getting a little laggy, which is why you may notice I've switched to the paper map. It's a shame, and I'm sure more progress will be made towards making the game run well over its lifetime, but swapping to paper certainly helped in the meantime. In 1665, I unlocked the Increase Area Control advance, which allowed me to really boost the amount of control I had over my country. One cabinet member would be permanently set to this from now on. From the war, I took much of Two Sicilies colonies north of Panama, and Castile was booted from Iberia. We then declared on Tlemcen in order to get to war with Morocco. Unfortunately, we couldn't deck directly on Morocco due to the union they were in. It seems like a bug, I think? Either way, the fighting was brutal, and trying to cross into Africa cost the lives of thousands. But superior Iberian steel, Basque steel, carried the day, and I pieced out for the 592,000 pops that Morocco had been oppressing in the south of what is rightfully our peninsula. I got what I had been waiting for all this time. And I guess for the end of this campaign, you can have some of me live. Hello, and welcome to the end of my Kingdom of Navarre pre-release sponsored video for Paradox about EU5. We have gotten to the end, and we have managed to do what we needed to do. The peace deal with Morocco was enough, and now we have the ability to form our country of Spain. Now, I was told, and I had been led to believe, that I needed to stay as Navarre to have the flag that I was looking for, and that was the whole point of this campaign. The whole drive was to earn the sexy flag. And I thought I had to click this button. I have every requirement except getting the prestige. Getting prestige in this game seems incredibly difficult if you're not Catholic, because then you can just canonize a dead ruler of the past for a bunch of prestige. Right now, it seems like a tall order, but it doesn't matter, because apparently forming Spain is exactly what I need to do. And that is why we needed to rid Iberia of Moroccans in the south. So let's click it, and we'll see what happens. Well, what happens is we have upgraded our flag, and now it looks absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. I will be ending the campaign here. There have been a few issues, a few crashing issues, and generally that's because this game is still pre-release. It is, as I am recording this right now, the 29th of October. This video is going to be going live on the 31st of October, and then the game comes out on the 4th of November for you guys. And there are still updates being made. There was an update, in fact, about 10 minutes ago, which is another reason that I'm ending this campaign now, because when I try and play on a save that has started in a previous patch and is now in a new patch, it's not a good time and you will be crashing. You can see some of the differences in the UI here as well. but it is what it is. Actually, that's actually quite nice having this here instead of kind of hidden away. I am very much enjoying my time with Europa Universalis 5, and I will be playing more of it. But what we're going to be doing now is having a little bit of a look at the things that I managed to do as the Kingdom of Spain. We're going to have a look at my economy, first of all. I ended up with a tax base of 6,274, and the graph reads quite nice. We had our... You can definitely tell where your little mini industrial age starts, and it is somewhat of an incredible spike that happens at that point. Tax-wise, the burger is giving us the most tax, but the... actually, no, the commoners are giving me the most tax. Burgers are catching up, though. I wasn't taxing the pastors, but I could get about 270 ducats from them if I so desired. The spending, though, is where I think is actually insane. If I was spending everything I could on the court, I would be spending 2,000 ducats on it, which I find just kind of incredible. This is because I managed in the end to become the 5-time hegemon of the world, even though I'm still only in 3rd place, which is very fun as well. I only built the ships just for this end bit. I'm never going to use however many 125 heavy ships. This was never going to happen. Just did it for the bit. But economically, yes, this is such a different experience to Europa Universalis 4. It's a completely different stratosphere when it comes to the economy, and going in seeing, oh, this building costs 100 ducats is not something that you should be able to link back to EU4 and make that kind of comparison, because it's just completely different stratospherically. I will say, for trade income, we managed to end up with a trade income of 1,500 ducats. I don't yet understand trade. I have played this game now for... I've got 82 hours in this version of the game, and I had 300 and something in the previous version that we got to play. And I don't really understand trade. I thought that this campaign was going to be the time when I tried to understand trade, and that's why I did the whole attempted slave trade into the Caribbean, into triangle trade situation, and it just did not pan out. If I have a look at my colony of Cuba here, they ended up with a grand total of 12,500 slaves, which is not exactly what I would have expected. Similarly, Marion has 2,000 slaves. I don't yet know how this is supposed to work. I am not sure if I just dislike the trading system, whether I dislike the way that one interacts with the trading system, or whether I just don't understand the trading system. I'm not the person you should be looking at for tutorials on how trade works. I need those tutorials, as much as it pains me to say. But I will be continuing to try. I know some people that absolutely adore this trading system, though they don't like the UI for it, and maybe I'm just missing something. It will click eventually, potentially. My society, we ended up with a cultural influence of 2,735, going up by 140 every single month. If we compare that to the other hegemons, yeah, we were kind of very far ahead of them. Shuzhou had 1,100, Daifiet 1,000, France 1,000. Our culture was just far more influential than France's. And our tradition is also very, very high as well. We ended up with enough capacity to take the entirety of the Castilians as well. I suppose that's what happens when you start massively culture converting. 48.92% of my pops ended up being Basque, and there are 11.7 million Basque pops in the world, which is more than my entire population. I have 5.1 million of them. Amata has 1.1 million, which is, of course, my colony here. I never ended up going for the rest of Mexico. It just seemed very painful to attempt. I am surprised that a lot of culture conversion was done here, though. Their cultural situation is majority Basque. They've just been teaching the people here how to speak Basque, it seems. Very nice indeed. Yeah, Castilians ended up with how many there? There are 4.8 million in the world, of which I have... don't know. Some amount. Either way, very cool indeed. Religion-wise, Lutheranism ended up being in 60% of my country, and one of the buttons that is quite nice to do occasionally is to just dissolve a few monasteries for a big lump sum of cash, and then, you know what, I'll do it again for some more cash. Yeah, it's very cute when you can just conquer a Catholic nation and just dissolve their monasteries. Military-wise, the buffs that we ended up getting is just some artillery power on our artillery from the superior firepower army doctrine law. This one you can choose a bunch of different types. I like the artillery power, but possible frontage and manpower there from a large standing army seems very nice as well. Don't really rate the fort defense, although, you know, maybe. Infantry power also could be good. Cavalry power I don't rate. And amphibious specialization I also don't rate, although monthly progress to naval would be nice. Navally, we end up with 15% people of the sea giving us 15%. There is another one that I missed that I think I even talked about looking to get, but never ended up getting it. Let's have a look at the rest of the world just real quick. You can just go to the world map whenever you want, and we can see that England... Let's consider this as part of England. They're having a little bit of a noble rebellion problem. My own colonies ended up being quite nice. Amerigo, we ended up with Oswegatchie, Florida, a small one in Huesca, Karankawa. We had Cuba, Jamaica, Marion, and the Windward Islands. And then Guayas, Amata, and Panama. Other colonizers ended up being the two Sicilies, did very, very well. Portugal did reasonable. And then going into Africa, Ferrara of all people, I don't think I saw them doing anything at all at any point. Genoa and Venice, Castile, France having a bit of the Congo for each of them. And then France got all the way around to Madagascar, though I don't believe anyone went any further than that. I don't think there are any Europeans in India, for example, or Indonesia, etc. But I think that is where I will leave it. EU5 comes out on the 4th of November. I will be allowed to start streaming the game with no restrictions placed upon me on the 2nd of November. So if you want a proper review style, this is what I think kind of way, then head on over to twitch.tv/LordLambert_, where I'll be doing a stream on the 2nd, talking all about it. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this campaign as Navarre into Spain. We got the lovely flag, though it did come with a map color downgrade. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.